The year is 1892, somewhere in southeastern Europe. You're a standard human being on your way to do standard human being things, like ride a horse-drawn carriage, or wander the streets at night with an old-timey oil lamp, or whatever other fun things people were doing at that time to keep busy. But as you walk past a dark alleyway, a stranger in a long coat emerges from the shadows. The vampire pulls you from the street into the darkness and sinks its fangs into your neck. That is your last living moment. Your life might be over, but your death has just begun. The transition from human to vampire must begin with your actual clinical death. Becoming a vampire is not just a simple blood exchange or magical transformation. Your heart stops beating, your lungs cease to draw breath, and for all medical purposes, you are deceased. Then reanimation. But reanimation isn't immediate. Traditionally, it takes 3 nights for the process to complete. During these 3 nights, your body undergoes excruciating changes that, thankfully, you're not conscious to experience. Your organs rot as they're no longer needed. They literally melt away, leaving behind a sulfurous goo. Your blood clots up and is gradually replaced by the vampiric essence that infected you. Your skin becomes pale and cold, losing its natural elasticity and warmth. Your canine teeth elongate and sharpen, transforming into the fangs you'll need for feeding. When you finally awaken on the 3rd night, the sensory overload is overwhelming. Your senses are heightened to supernatural levels. Sounds that humans can barely register now boom in your ears. Smells become so intense that they can physically repel you. Your vision sharpens dramatically, particularly in darkness, but at the cost of becoming painfully sensitive to bright light. But the biggest challenge is your hunger. This isn't ordinary hunger that can be satisfied with food. In fact, normal food and drinks become repulsive to you, often making you throw up if consumed. What you crave is human blood, and this craving isn't just psychological. It's a biological necessity that causes physical pain if denied for too long. Like most new vampires, you attempt to avoid this hunger, but after a week, it just becomes too much to handle, and you succumb to the impulse like every other vampire before you. The hunger of a newly turned vampire is nearly uncontrollable. During your first few months of undeath, you'll be in a constant state of what feels like excruciating starvation. Proximity to humans becomes both irresistibly enticing, but torturously difficult. You can hear their heartbeats, smell their blood pumping through their veins, and the predatory instinct to feed overwhelms all other thoughts and concerns. Traditionally in vampire society, the vampire who turns you into one of the undead is tasked with guiding you through this transition period. But vampires aren't the most reliable. Often, you will be left to fend for yourself. Without guidance, newly turned vampires often become savage killers, draining their victims completely and leaving conspicuous corpses that draw unwanted attention, which leads to them being hunted down and killed. However, with proper instruction, you'll learn to feed without killing, taking just enough blood to sustain yourself while leaving your victim alive, albeit weakened and with foggy memories of the encounter. Learning to control your hunger is just the first of many adjustments you'll need to make to your new undead experience. There are many severely restricting vulnerabilities that come with being a vampire, defining every day of the rest of your quote-unquote life. Sunlight is your most famous and deadliest enemy. If you find yourself in direct sunlight, no matter how minor, you will be burnt to a crisp in an instant. Even a fleeting torch of light will leave permanent burns, and diffused daylight through windows or on cloudy days will still cause severe burning and pain. This forces you into a completely nocturnal existence, limiting your activities to the nighttime hours and requiring you to have a secure shelter during daylight. You eventually become incredible at telling the time, developing a strong sense of when the sun is going to arise. In the winter, you have a lot of time to go out in the open and feed, but in the summertime, hours in the day without the sun dwindle. Sometimes, you have as little as 5 or 6 hours to operate at night before the sun emerges again. You may be functionally immortal, but you have far less productive hours in the day than normal humans. Finding a suitable shelter for the daytime becomes a constant concern. Traditional law states that vampires must rest in soil from their native land, usually within a coffin. Some of the older vampires insist that this is an ironclad rule, and considering they have been around for centuries, if not millennia, they are kind of the experts. However, there's also rumors of more modern vampires who just rest somewhere that is absolutely light-proof. but you don't really want to risk finding out. So you take some soil from your home and place it wherever you rest, just to be safe. Your daytime sleep is not optional. As dawn approaches, you're overcome by paralysis that renders you completely vulnerable until the sun sets again. This daily period of helplessness is perhaps your greatest weakness, because any humans who discover your resting place could easily destroy you while you're unable to defend yourself. Water is also another significant obstacle. Vampires cannot cross running water, so rivers, streams, and even heavy rain can completely hinder your movement. You find yourself more landlocked than most other creatures, and depending where you are in the world, you can find yourself completely trapped by rivers. A vampire born in Cairo is trapped between the Rosetta and the Damietta branches of the Nile. And vampires east of the Mississippi River find it almost impossible to make it to the west coast without great inconvenience. Religious symbols and artifacts pose serious threats as well. Crosses, crucifixes, holy water, and blessed areas all repel or harm you. The psychological impact of being cut from religious institutions and symbols that may have been important in your human life adds to the isolation of vampirism. Churches, temples, and other sacred spaces become forbidden territory, further limiting your ability to move freely through human society. In the modern day, this isn't as bad a restriction as it once was, but a surprising amount of buildings have been blessed by priests, making each excursion into unknown territory a risky game to play. Common household items like garlic and certain herbs are repulsive and potentially harmful to you. The smell of garlic, which humans might find only a little strong, is unbearably corrosive to your heightened vampire senses. Another part of the vampire curse is that when you come across raw, unprocessed grains like rice or seeds, you become compelled to count them, trapping you in mindless counting until every grain is accounted for. It's a strange but debilitating weakness, often exploited by knowledgeable vampire hunters who've dedicated their lives to murdering your kind. Your relationship with human residences brings another limitation: the need for invitation. You cannot enter a private residence unless explicitly invited in by someone who lives there. This restriction doesn't apply to public buildings or abandoned structures, but it severely limits your ability to access potential victims or blend into human society. Once invited, you can enter freely until your invitation is revoked, making it essential for any vampire to get permission before attempting to function in human society. Mirrors present yet another challenge. As a vampire, you don't have a reflection. This isn't just inconvenient. It's a constant reminder of your unnatural state. Your image does not appear in mirrors, photographs, or any reflective surface. One of the few ways to figure out what you look like is to have someone draw you, which is also far less likely in the modern world than what it would have been for the older vampires. These physical limitations are difficult enough, but the psychological and social aspects that come with being a vampire are equally challenging. The transition from human to vampire isn't just physical, it also fundamentally alters your mind and emotional responses. As the decades pass, your emotional range gradually shrinks. Strong emotions like love, empathy, and compassion become increasingly difficult to access, while predatory emotions like hunger and dominance intensify. This emotional transformation isn't immediate, but progresses slowly, meaning you'll still remember what it was like to feel human connection, even as it becomes increasingly foreign to you. Becoming a vampire changes the way you see people. Everyone around you turns into either a potential meal or a curiosity. Even those you once loved aren't just friends or family anymore. They're food sources, whether you like it or not. It's hard to have real relationships when there's such a messed up power imbalance. A lot of vampires end up keeping their distance, quietly watching certain humans from the shadows, maybe feeding on them now and then, without ever letting them know the truth. It's a weird, one-sided connection, but for most vampires, it's the closest thing they have to friendship. Then there's the whole issue of time. While you stay exactly the same, the people you knew in your old life grow older and eventually die. Your family, your friends, they all fade away. And it happens so fast it barely feels real. You can't even go to their funerals. The sun won't let you. So you're stuck mourning them from the sidelines, never really getting to say goodbye. Time starts to feel different when you're immortal. Decades blur into years, which blur into centuries, especially since your nights are so much shorter than the daylight hours you have to avoid. Human worries and short-term dramas seem to be pointless, and urgency becomes a foreign concept. You might spend years just lost in thought, only bothering to resurface when you need to feed. The longer you live, the more detached you become. And before you know it, you're thinking less like a person and more like something else. Your relationship with your maker adds another layer of complexity to your undead existence. In most vampire traditions, a maker has absolute authority over their fledgling, kind of like a parent-child relationship, but with a much darker twist. In the beginning, you have no choice but to obey them, and stepping out of line can mean serious consequences. That power dynamic doesn't fade either. Vampire society runs on strict hierarchies, where the older you are, the more power you hold. Younger vampires are expected to show respect, or suffer the consequences. Unlike humans, vampires aren't big on community. Most prefer to stick to themselves, or stay in small, controlled groups, usually just the maker and their offspring. When larger gatherings do happen, they're tense and dangerous. Too many predators in one place is a recipe for disaster. Some vampire, quote-unquote, courts do exist, but they function more like authoritarian regimes, where strict rules are brutally enforced to keep the chaos in check. The rules governing the creation of new vampires are particularly strict. Turning someone into a vampire isn't something you can just do on a whim. It's a big deal. Too many vampires mean more competition for food and a higher risk of humans catching on. And that's why most vampire societies have strict rules about it. If you turn someone without permission from the elders, you're not just in trouble, you're dead. If you ever want to create a companion to share eternity with, you'll have to jump through a lot of political hoops and play the vampire power game just right. Even if you get permission, choosing who to turn is a huge responsibility. This person is going to be tied to you for decades, maybe centuries, and everything they do reflects back on you. If they screw up, break vampire laws, or attract too much attention, you're the one who pays the price. That's why vampires are so careful about who they bring into the fold. It's not just about having company, it's about survival. Then there's the more moral side of it. Turning someone means dooming them to the same existence you're stuck with. Endless hunger, isolation, and watching the world move on without you. A lot of older vampires refuse to do it, knowing firsthand how heavy immortality can be. The ones who do usually pick people who are already dying or suffering, convincing themselves they're offering mercy. Others, they just enjoy watching their creations struggle, treating it like a cruel game. Eventually, you'll have to decide where you stand in all of this. Because if you don't, you'll end up an outcast. And in the vampire world, being completely alone is a dangerous thing. Drinking human blood comes with a whole mess of ethical dilemmas. Unlike wild animals that hunt purely on instinct, you still have enough of your human mind to know exactly what you're doing, and what it means. Every vampire deals with this in their own way. Some only feed on willing victims, using their powers to mesmerize them into compliance, convincing themselves that it's some form of consent. Others justify it by targeting criminals, or those they see as deserving. A few older vampires have even adapted to survive on animal blood, even though it's not as nourishing, requires more frequent feeding, and earns them the scorn of more traditional vampires. No matter who you choose to feed on, the act itself is always intense. Vampire saliva dulls pain and floods the victim's system with euphoria, making the experience disturbingly pleasurable for them. Some even seek you out for it, just to experience the high. But no matter how much they might enjoy it, the reality is the same. You're using them to survive. Modern technology only complicates things. Blood banks might seem like an easy solution, but hospital security systems make it risky, and the preservatives used in stored blood make it less satisfying. Plus, if supplies start disappearing, people notice. And in vampire society, getting caught isn't just a personal problem, it's a death sentence. If humans ever found out about the undead, it wouldn't end well for either side. So, when it comes to feeding, the unspoken rule is simple. Stay hidden, or don't stay at all. The modern world makes staying hidden harder than ever. Security cameras, facial recognition, and digital records means you can't just slip through the cracks like vampires used to. You don't show up on video, which sounds useful, until someone notices the empty space where your face should be. Simple things like opening a bank account or renting an apartment become nearly impossible without someone to handle it for you. That's where familiars come in. These human servants act as your link to the modern world, handling the paperwork and blending in where you can't. But loyalty doesn't come free. Most familiars are bond to their vampire masters through blood, a small taste every now and then, keeping them hooked and obedient. The catch? They are still human. They age, they die, and every time you bring in a new one, you take a risk that they'll betray you. Then there's money, essential for staying comfortable and, more importantly, staying unnoticed. Older vampires have it easy. They've had centuries to build wealth, stashing fortunes under fake identities and hiding assets behind layers of human-controlled businesses. Newer vampires, not so much. If you weren't rich before you turned, you'll have to figure it out fast. Because without money, you don't just risk hunger, you risk exposure. And in this world, that's a death sentence. Vampire abilities might seem like they make up for all the downsides, but they come with their own problems. Superhuman strength and speed sound great, until you constantly have to hold back to avoid crushing the fragile humans around you. Hypnotizing people with a glance makes feeding and staying hidden easier, but it only deepens the predator-prey dynamic that slowly strips away whatever humanity you have left. As vampires get older, some develop even stranger powers, shapeshifting into bats, wolves, or mist, moving objects with their minds, even controlling the weather. These abilities are impressive, but in vampire society, they're also a sign you're slipping further from what you once were. Some embrace it, reveling in their inhuman nature. Others feel uneasy about the fear they inspire, knowing they're becoming something unrecognizable. But the real curse of vampirism isn't the hunger, the isolation, or even the danger. It's the emptiness. Humans live with a deadline, which gives their lives urgency, meaning a reason to chase dreams and leave something behind. You don't have that. There's no rush, no real stakes. You can master skills, create art, hoard wealth, and build relationships. But when you have forever, what does any of it really matter? The centuries stretch ahead, endless and unchanging, and at some point, you have to ask yourself, what's the point? Eventually, even the oldest vampires reach a breaking point. Some decide they've had enough, choosing to end it by stepping into the sun or picking a fight with a vampire hunter they know they won't win. Immortality, for all its promises, often turns out to be more of a curse than a gift. Others don't end things outright, but slip into deep sleep instead, shutting themselves away for decades or even centuries. They only wake when something forces them to. Whether it's danger, necessity, or just a fleeting moment of curiosity about how the world has changed. A rare few manage to find purpose in the endless stretch of time. Some dedicate themselves to preserving knowledge, some manipulate human affairs from the shadows, and others obsess over unraveling the mysteries of their own existence. But even they aren't immune to the weight of eternity. No matter how much purpose they find, there are always stretches of time, years, sometimes centuries, where the emptiness takes hold, and they're left wondering if anything they do really matters. You'll have to face the same choice as every vampire before you. If you haven't been hunted down or killed by then, you'll hit what some call the ennui, that creeping, inevitable point where immortality starts to feel unbearably empty. This existential period is the defining moment that separates the adult vampires from the elderly vampires. Some vampires try to fill the void by surrounding themselves with younger vampires and loyal familiars, building their own little empire of the undead, while others search for a cure to vampirism itself. But in the end, vampire society is so closed off, so detached, that you can do whatever you want, but you know that one way or another, it won't make much of a difference.